The rotation period of either a planet or satellite, when near its gravitative radiative center, is so long that such a mass always keeps the same surface toward that center. Mercury, for example, is so embedded in the dense high potential pressures of such close proximity, not alone to the Sun but also to the focus of its ecliptic area in the plane of the solar equator, that it cannot turn faster than the contracted ecliptic area pressure of the Sun in that position will allow it. Venus has not only journeyed into the much lower pressures of twice the distance from the Sun, but has also broken well away from its close relation to the very high pressures of the solar equatorial plane. As a consequence, Venus is rotating sufficiently fast to periodically expose her entire surface to the Sun. The Earth's satellite, and in all probability 2 to 4 of Jupiter's, are still so bound to the high pressure zones of their gravitative centers that they are obliged to keep their same faces constantly toward their parents. The reason for the accelerated rotation of the outer planets of a system and the decelerated rotation of the inner ones is very simple. Outer planets are further south in their systems, and inner ones are further north. Magnetic acceleration of rotation is toward the south, and toward increasing oblateness, which leads to plane. Electric deceleration of rotation is toward the north, and toward decreasing oblateness, which leads to mass. In a high potential position, the contraction of general activity from within is sufficiently great to retard the pinwheel-like impetus developed by its radioactive expulsion from within. In a low potential position, where the ratio of general-active force is very materially reduced, the balance of radioactive force is materially greater in proportion. The pinwheel-like effect of rotation due to a centrifugal preponderance gradually gains control with a resultant acceleration. It must be recalled that acceleration of any one dimension must be balanced by deceleration of another. What a planet gains or loses in power time must be balanced by gain or loss in speed time. Neptune, the outer planet, her satellite, and some of the outer satellites of Jupiter and Saturn appear to rotate in the opposite direction to that of other planets. This is termed the retrograde direction. Planets never cease turning in the same direction. They but change their positions in relation to us as observers. If one looks down on the north pole of a mass which is turning from west to east, it will appear to turn counterclockwise, as though the hands of a clock turned backward. Conversely, if one looks up on the south pole of a mass which is turning from west to east, it will appear to turn clockwise. We are not permitted to change our positions in space to so observe the various planets, but the various planets have changed their relative potential positions so that we see the poles tilting in sufficient different angles to produce the same effect as though we had changed our position. We look almost directly at the south pole of Uranus, and as a consequence it turns quite clockwise, its 4 moons revolving retrogressively and always in view. In this position they transcribe full circles instead of 4 shortened ones. We see Neptune with its north pole tilting upside down. Naturally, Neptune will appear to rotate in quite the opposite direction, and her satellites will also appear to revolve in the opposite direction to that of our planet. Just so with the outer satellites of Jupiter and Saturn. These 2 planets have not turned upside down, but the satellites which rotate and revolve in a retrograde direction have broken so far away from the ecliptic control of their primaries that the effect is the same as though they were still close to their primaries, and their primaries had turned upside down. These outer satellites of Jupiter and Saturn, which revolve in retrograde directions to us as observers, will continue to break still farther away from the control of their primaries until they become comets, which have two controls instead of one. Let us recall another basic law which reads, all mass simultaneously expresses both opposite effects of motion, and each opposite effect is cumulatively preponderant in repetitive sequences. Consider the effect of this law upon the rotation of a mass. A newborn planet is increasingly generated for a time. Being a small mass as compared to the Sun, it matures more quickly. During the contractive period, it rotates in such a position that its equator is at an angle of nearly 90 degrees to the solar equator. As radiative oscillations accumulate toward the equilibrium of maturity, the equator gradually settles down to a plane of coincidence with the solar equator. The pole of rotation tilts to an upright position, and the charging poles creep toward the pole of rotation. As radiative oscillations accumulate to a negative preponderance for the mass, the equator slips below the solar equatorial plane. The poles of rotation tip further toward a reversal of their natal positions, and the charging poles creep down and up the planet's contour toward its equator. Negative preponderance in its sequence turns the planet upside down as its potential position lowers. Its discharging surface becomes very much greater than its charging surface. When this position has been reached, the planet appears to rotate the other way, the opposite from direct, which is termed the retrograde direction. If these statements are true and the rotation of a mass varies in speed and power according to its potential position, then the 12th as well as the first dimension should be taken into consideration in the writing of the law of gravitation. If these statements are true, slow rotation must be related to the attraction of gravitation, which accumulates mass through the power of general active energy expressed inductively as positive charge, and fast rotation to the repulsion of radiation, which redistributes mass through the power of radioactive energy expressed conductively as negative discharge. And on to another chapter called Expressions of Gravitation and Radiation. Revolution, the 13th dimension. All mass revolves around a nuclear center, which becomes the gravitative radiative center of that mass. All shapeless, amorphous mass revolving spirally in the electric stream, a centripetal force around a vortex, becomes rotating spherical mass when sufficiently accumulated. Fast revolution is nature's method of generating energy into an accumulation in mass, and slow rotation is her method of storing that accumulation. Fast rotation is nature's method of dissipating stored accumulations of energy in mass. When fast revolving mass becomes fast rotating mass, the ratios of its separate parts reverse their dimension attributes. Rotation gives its speed to revolution and takes power from revolution in equal exchange. Rotation is an effect which is born of revolution. All revolving mass is either headed toward a vortex, thus increasing both charge and discharge, or away from a vortex, thus decreasing both charge and discharge. The revolution of mass begins in the maximum tenuity of the inertial plane and ends in the maximum rigidity of the point of north at the overtone of the wave. The outward journey begins with a preponderance of positive charge and of increasing speed, and ends at the point of cessation of speed. The return journey begins with a preponderance of negative discharge and maximum speed from the accumulation of mass at the point of north, and ends with cessation of speed at the inertial plane.